What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So a bit of a follow-up video and also a response to someone in the comment section sort of video, because if you saw the other day, I made that video about heavyweights versus lightweights. I discussed like why heavyweights have always been like more technically flawed, less skilled fighters than people in the lighter divisions, and I went into exhaustive detail about that. And someone in the comment section of that video asked about durability as far as it pertains to like heavier versus lighter fighters, because, you know, we all know that you're more likely to see knockouts the heavier up you go. You know, if you watch a given flyweight fight versus a given heavyweight fight, you're more likely to see a knockout in the latter. And he asked me, like, is that because your chin gets worse the bigger you get, or is it just a function of the power increasing the heavier you get? And he asked me sort of like a fun hypothetical, which is there a flyweight on earth who can absorb a full power punch from Francis Ngannou and not get knocked out? So I'm going to unpack all that, and I'm going to unpack some adjacent things that opens the door to, because knockouts are not just about durability and power, even though we're going to discuss like how those things shift the heavier you get. Now, I want to say up front that a lot of this is like bro science BS, okay? A lot of this is just sort of folk wisdom that exists in the combat sports community. Some of it's just like, you know, traditionally accepted ideas. Some of it's just anecdotal, and it's more of like an impression of the like overall collection of anecdotes, because in every case you're going to find counter examples. So even anecdotally, the stuff is very flimsy, but there are certain just like accepted ideas. And despite that, like you can make interesting counter arguments to those accepted ideas. So like, for example, MMA Shay has a very good YouTube channel. He does some of the best like fight film breakdown I've seen. And I know he's like a lifelong martial artist. I believe he coaches jiu-jitsu right now, and I've seen some of his training footage. He's very skilled, very good YouTube channel. But he has a very strange, sort of extreme take, which is that he doesn't believe fighters' chins deteriorate as they get older or as they get knocked out more times. Now, of course, that runs against all conventional wisdom, which is that not only does your chin age as you get older, but the more times you get hit, the more times you get dropped, the more times you get slept, the worse the chin is going to get. You know, that it has this finite, this finite HP that's just getting diminished and diminished with every blow. And that's sort of the standard opinion. And he argues against that. He argues that, like, he's not convinced of that, and that he's never seen anything to suggest there's anything more to that phenomenon, to the phenomenon of older washed fighters getting knocked out more frequently, than factors like the sport catching up to them and factors like their other attributes diminishing. So as far as the sport catching up to them, that could mean like, you know, you were a fighter whose heyday was in 2009, now it's 2014, and you're fighting these up-and-comers who are just more technically skilled than you because the sport has progressed. So you're fighting better strikers than you did in 2009, and surprise, surprise, they're knocking you out. As far as your other attributes diminishing and that being the explanation, so that would be like, well, you're just older, which means you're slower. It means your reaction time is worse, your vision might be worse, etc. Like, you're probably just not seeing the shit coming, and you're not bracing, you're not rolling with it, you're not getting your hand up in time, etc. the way you used to, and surprise, surprise, you get knocked out more often. And I think he's making an interesting point. I think those factors certainly play a role, but nevertheless, it does just seem the case that guys can't take punches as well when they're older. And obviously that's true at like when you get really old. So it's like a 60-year-old man simply doesn't have the physicality to absorb damage. Their muscles have atrophied to some degree. Their bones are more fragile. Their connective tissue is weaker, etc. Like, they just can't eat the damage the way they used to. But even just guys who are starting to age out a little, so someone who's going from like age 30 to age 35, you know, I do think that the more damage you take and the more knockouts you accumulate, I do think that has some diminishing effect on your chin. And I think like he uses the example of Chuck Liddell and Rashad Evans, where, you know, Rashad like one punch KOs Liddell, and Liddell famously had this like great chin. He had been in all these wars, and then at the end of his career he was getting knocked out a bunch. And he argued like, look, if you look at that punch in a vacuum, it's this full force overhand with like his entire body behind it, this like full wind up and swing, and it lands right on the button. That could have landed at any point in Liddell's career, and it could have knocked him out. And that's true, but at the same time, Liddell nevertheless got knocked out in like 4 out of 5 fights at the end of his career. And like one of them was by Rich Franklin. It's like someone who famously, a middleweight, but famously not a great knockout artist, not a great power puncher, and yet he's knocking out Chuck Liddell in round 1. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's, you can't just write it off to like, well, this guy's younger, well, this guy just caught him with like the perfect punch that would have always gotten him. It's like, no, at a certain point, you just see everything is hurting these guys more profoundly than it did in the past. Having said that, there's counterexamples to all these. Like there's guys whose chins appeared gone, and yet they kept fighting for years and years, like Andrei Arlovsky. And in some cases, their chins just had like great performances. And by that, I mean, you'd have a guy who'd been knocked out and slept countless times go to war with someone who like hits harder than most of their opponents and is just taking damage and damage and damage, and yet they don't get knocked out. Just look at Bigfoot Silva. He'd been knocked out plenty of times by the time he fought Mark Hunt the first time, and yet they have this 5-round epic war that's just like a slobber knocker, and you're like, how the fuck is Bigfoot Silva like tanking these shots? And so it's very inconsistent. Mark Hunt himself, like, iron chin, fairly early in his MMA career, he got dropped, with one punch and knocked out by a middleweight, by Melvin Manhoef. And if you know who Melvin Manhoef is, that's like the least surprising middleweight to get one punch KO'd by. But nevertheless, it did happen, and that's like somewhat an anomaly in Hunt's career. So again, it's very iffy. And yeah, like to truly quantify it, we would need to look at every example and look at like, okay, well, did they see this punch coming? Like, how flush did it connect? Like, who's the person who threw it? Et cetera, et cetera. And we just can't do that. We just kind of have our vague impressions from watching the sport and competing in it. Now, as far as the person in the comment section who asked, like, does your chin get worse the bigger you get, or does the power just get that much bigger? I think it's mostly the power, because every weight class, like people in adjacent weight classes can compete with them without the chin becoming an issue. Because if your chin just got worse, you would expect this like tipping point where like, middleweights could go up to light heavyweight, or light heavyweights could go up to heavyweight, or welterweights could go up to middleweight or something. And you would just have this effect where it's like, bro, your chin sucks. Mine is better. You've hit like this tipping point where I can hurt you worse than you can hurt me. And you would expect that to manifest itself like pretty reliably. Now, this is going to connect to like another video I'm going to put out in a few days, which is also a response to someone in the comment section, my man Rusty, who's asked me on multiple occasions whether or not the smaller guy actually has the advantage. He's basically co-opted Chael Sonnen's argument that the worst opponent is actually a guy who's like one weight class smaller than you. I'm going to get into that in that video. But as it connects to this, there just isn't this obvious tipping point advantage where like you're heavy enough that you're close to their weight, but your chin is like better enough than theirs that you can just like comfortably beat them. Like that just doesn't happen. What does happen is that the bigger you get, just the odds of the knockout go up. And I think that's in part because of the power, because I think once I think there's a tipping point probably in the heavyweight division. So it's like when you're well into 200 pounds and up, like I think your mass hits a point that it's like you can just generate so much power with ordinary techniques, with like ordinary power punches, that the human body is just not, like the chin doesn't scale up enough to tank those shots, which doesn't mean no one can, because there are obviously famous examples of great heavyweights. I mentioned Mark Hunt, but guys like Nogueira, Junior Dos Santos earlier in his career, etc. Guys who could take just monster shots. So it's not like no one can take these. But generally speaking, I think the human body, I think there's a certain point of mass where your power is going to scale past your chin. I think that's what happens. And that's not the only factor, though, because again, like how you see the punch coming and your ability to defend it matters a lot. And like when you're small, when you're a flyweight, I think speed favors striking defense more than it favors striking offense. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you're smaller and you're faster, which means your hand speed is faster, so your punches are faster, but everything else is faster too. So the other guy's ability to be light on his feet and like move out of range as soon as you close to punch him. His ability to move his head really quickly and get it back is going to be faster. His ability to get that hand up in time is just going to be faster. And I think all that together, again, it kind of favors the defensive guy, the guy who's trying not to get hit and not to eat a flush shot. I think that favors them more than it favors the person throwing the punches. Whereas at heavyweight, the fact that everyone's so lumbering and slow by virtue of their size, they're just easier to hit. It's like, because the punches are coming slower and your ability to like cut the, close distance and stuff is slower too, but their ability to dodge and escape and get the fuck out of there and move their head offline and do it in a way that's like allows them to like continue either counterattack or like continue evading. So like not just throwing themselves off balance, but like slipping and coming in and then pivoting and coming up with a counter punch. Like their ability to do all that is just so diminished by virtue of the fact that they're like 6'5" and 270. That it's just so easy to get in and bop, 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 and just like throw some hard punches. And outside of covering or just throwing with you, trading, they have more limited options. And I think that's a big part of why they get knocked out. So, like, as far as defense, kind of building on that, I'm reminded of something my boxing coach told me a long time ago, which is different types of defense don't scale with size. Like, they don't work as well at higher weight classes. So, for example, the shoulder roll, the Philly shell, the stonewall, the Floyd Mayweather defense, where you do this, where you use the shoulder roll to protect your chin. Like my boxing coach was saying, like that works better the lighter you are. That doesn't work great for heavyweights. And the reason is there's more of a consequence if you fuck up as a heavyweight using that kind of defense. Because if you think about it, like if I'm here and I'm using, I'm protecting my chin, I'm using my shoulder to roll the punch as you throw like a right hand at me. That's all well and good if you're aiming at my chin, but what if you miss and go up a little higher and it hits me more on top of the head? Now the temple is obviously a vulnerable spot, but you can sort of protect the temple by just tilting your head when you're doing that kind of shoulder roll. But even if it doesn't hit the temple, it might just hit you on top of the head. And ordinarily, that wouldn't hurt you very much. Ordinarily, you can just take shots on top of the head and it's not a big deal. I mean, it's bad for your brain long term, but it's not going to like knock you out. But honestly, for heavyweights, especially heavyweights with like serious power, like you can't just like take shots even on top of the head, like time after time after time. So like what I mean by that is, if you are fighting Terrence Crawford and you try to shoulder roll a right hand and he hits you on top of the head, that's not ideal, but that's not the end of the world. Whereas if you try that against Deontay Wilder and he hits you on top of the head, that might still like rock you. Like like just because it's the top of the head and not the chin, not behind the ear, not the temple, not the side of the neck, not the actual like desired targets. Just because it's the top of the head doesn't mean he can't fuck you up hitting you there, because he's a heavyweight with real power. Same if Francis Ngannou hits you on top of the head. Like you're not guaranteed to be fine just because it's the top of the head. So all of a sudden, something like the shoulder roll is a dicier form of defense up at heavyweight. And I know people are going to say like, oh, James Toney, he was a heavyweight, he shoulder rolled all the time. Example that proves the rule. It's kind of like Jose Aldo having a mostly Muay Thai sort of stance, but also having the best takedown defense ever. Example that proves the rule. Anyways, like it, with defense scaling up to heavyweight, it also makes me think of Bas Rutten, because Bas Rutten has always had these very like hardcore, kind of brutal ideas about striking and about defense, about what kind of strikes work, what kind of stances work, what kinds of defense work. And it's gotten criticisms from people, but I'm reminded of when he made a video about covering. So like a common defense in boxing, if someone throws a left hook, is I cover. I put my hand on top of my head and I brace, and I take the punch on my glove. And he was basically saying that's bullshit. He's saying that doesn't work. He basically said, look, like, how about this? We'll just tape. Like, I'll take a focus mitt, a pad. Let's tape it to the side of your head. You stand there and brace, and I'll throw a left hook as hard as I can. And you tell me if you're confident that fucking pad is going to like keep you from getting dinged when I hit you full force. And Gabriel Varga, who's himself, I think, a Glory world champion kickboxer, he made a response video basically saying, the cover works great. And he said, I actually would be confident with my ability to like not get dropped in that hypothetical where I just tape a pad to my head and brace. And he's like, look, like if I see the punch coming and I can like, brace my neck, I can lean into it a little, like that padding combined with those things and keeping me from taking the shot on the jaw, on the back of the ear, etc. Like that will keep me like relatively safe, was his argument. But he even conceded in the video towards the end that Boss is talking about this from the perspective of a heavyweight, okay? And defense that works for a lighter to middle-sized guy like Varga simply might not work at heavyweight. So like, it's all well and good to talk about that again at his weight class, but like imagine like a proper hook. So not just like a short little hook, but like a proper boom kind of hook, like full body and everything. A proper hook and from an actual hard-hitting heavyweight. So like Mike Tyson, a hook. Imagine a full power hook from Mike Tyson and you're relying on just that brace. Dicey. And Boss was saying for that reason he actually likes to block away from his head so that there's like room for the force to dissipate and for it to not go directly into his fucking skull and neck and everything. And that has its upsides and its downsides. There's like a risk the more you reach away from your head, but it comes with the benefit, like he described, of like minimizing the odds of you getting knocked out by that one shot or getting really hurt by that one shot. And these are just differences. These are just differences in considerations and in the cost-benefit analysis of techniques that go into fighting at heavyweight versus going to fighting at flyweight. And all this is to say, like, if you're gonna look at the like knockout ability of both guys, if you're gonna take like, fill in the blank heavyweight, you're gonna take Tom Aspinall and you're gonna take Joshua Van. You're gonna say like, why is Tom Aspinall, probably more likely to get knocked out when he fights than Joshua Van is when he fights? Again, it's not simply that Tom's chin is worse, because I don't think it is. And it's not simply that Tom's fighting opponents with greater power, which he definitely is. Like even guys who aren't like great strikers in that division, or who are just kind of like okay strikers, but they're not great knockout artists, like someone like Curtis Blade, like there is just a risk that every punch Curtis Blade throws is going to like hurt you and drop you that is not there when you fight some random flyweight who's a wrestler and not much of a striker. Okay, it's just not the same. And it's for many reasons. And you see where they overlap, because if you are fighting someone who can hit so much harder, like I've just described, it's not just that like, oh, it's harder to get out of the way. It's not just, oh, we're less technical because we're heavyweights. It's quite literally like you can't use the same kinds of defenses, because shoulder rolling and covering and things like that it's not like they can't work, but they're much less reliable. And even like Floyd Mayweather, like I think Fran Sands, who is a British boxing coach, he has a great YouTube channel, he talked about this. He's like, even Floyd Mayweather kind of only used the shoulder roll when he was in control of the fight. When he was steering the direction of the fight and trying to set certain things up and whatever. But anytime he actually got clipped by something and was like kind of worried that he was going to get hurt, he wouldn't keep shoulder rolling. He would switch to a more traditional high guard, because that's actually better for protecting yourself than the shoulder roll is. So like even there you see that, but you see all the more why that would be true. Again, if you are fighting, Anthony Joshua or Francis Ngannou or whoever the fuck up at heavyweight, like, it's just not getting your head blown off. It's just a more constant worry. So you need to like do things that are more bang for buck in terms of like stopping each strike from doing that. And then naturally that encourages you to throw everything with more power, kind of like Bas Rutten. That's like the flip side. Bas Rutten gets criticized for like not liking to throw the jab in a traditional jabbing fashion, but instead to square up and throw it more like a jolting power shot. And it's like, that makes sense in certain ways from a kickboxing perspective, which I'm not going to go into, but like it also makes sense from, again, you're kind of rolling, every time you guys trade, anytime you guys get into striking range and throw strikes as heavyweights, the dice roll is just more dicey, every time, because the risk of the knockout is greater. So it also encourages you to make sure the shit you throw is more devastating, is more powerful, is an actual power shot and not something setting up a power shot. Like I had a guy in the comment section of that video who had some interesting things to say. Like he said he was an actual heavyweight. He was like a 6'5", 265 heavyweight. He said he had like stopped fighting, but he was like a 7-3 pro as a heavyweight. And he gave his 2 cents on why he thought heavyweights were less technical. And one of the things he said was like, look, like when you realize like every punch can hurt the guy, you just don't need as elaborate of setups as do the smaller fighters. And I don't think that's an argument to like not be technical or to like not set anything up, like not actually learn how to throw intelligently in combination or to feint, etc. as a heavyweight. But it is true that like the stuff a heavyweight has to do to set up the knockout blow is just much, much, much less than the stuff like Max Holloway has to do. You know what I mean? And even Ilia Topuria, you know, an actual power puncher down in a lighter weight class, still has more chores to do to actually get in range and actually get into position, you know, that he can land a proper power punch that the guy's not ready for. It's just a bigger pain in the ass for him than it is for Sergey Pavlovich or someone like that. Like that just is true for all these reasons. So again, like I think it's more like a thing of power scaling than it is of like chins getting worse or something, or chins not scaling the heavier you get. But all these other factors tie into that. And as far as the question of like, could a flyweight ever absorb a full power strike from Francis Ngannou? I mean, probably not. You know, never say never, but like, what I think this question sort of misses is that almost no one can just take a flush punch from him. And what I mean by that is, if you actually watch closely in combat sports, like serious combat sports, guys don't get hit flush that often. But what I mean by that is when they eventually do, it usually hurts them really badly or knocks them out. So the fact that they're not just getting knocked out 30 seconds into every fight is a function of the fact that they're not getting hit flush that often. And that's more true the heavier you go, because for all the reasons we just said, like you just can't take the damage as well the heavier you go, so you can't get, all the more can you not get hit flush as often. But in any case, like, if guys can actually strike, you just can't, like, you just can't eat those shots flush. Like, you see it more in like older MMA fights. So like, you can watch a sloppy brawl from like the early Pride days, and they are just taking them on the chin. But half the time, that's because the guy punching doesn't know how to punch. It's like arm punches like that, and yeah, the guy can take more on the chin when the mechanics aren't there. But when you get someone who actually knows how to strike and is actually a bit athletic, you just can't eat a lot of flush shots. Power shots, that is. Like I'm talking about like crosses, overhands, rear hand uppercuts, like hooks with actual body weight behind them. Like you just can't eat those kinds of shots. You know, maybe you can get away with it here and there, but you can't regularly eat those. So when guys are getting hit, it's almost always partial. It's almost always a punch that doesn't quite hit the sweet spot. You know, it doesn't quite hit the part of the jaw you're looking for, or behind the ear the way you're looking for. The guy's bracing in a certain way. The guy's rolling with it in a certain way. They're seeing it coming. It's glancing instead of like directly going right in there. Like all these sorts of things lead to punches landing and still having some accumulative damaging effect, but without truly landing clean and without like by themselves dropping the person. So in that sense, like, not many people can eat a single flush power shot from Francis Ngannou. They simply can't. And if they can, it starts introducing questions of like, well, what does flush even mean? Because it's like, do they see it coming? Do they get to brace? Are they allowed to roll with it like literally at all? Like all these things will affect it. Like even a sport like power slap, you know, sport, but like even power slap, you're not supposed to like, I don't know exactly how the rules are, but you're not supposed to just like dodge the fucking slap. Like if they swing at you, you're not supposed to just like move with it. But you can see even there, even though there's some rules, some regulation controlling that, guys still roll with it a little. And it just takes a little. It's like Jake LaMotta, the boxer, the guy Raging Bullets based off. He talked about that. He's like, look, it looks like I'm getting hit more than I am, because when I'm getting hit, I've got so much experience, like I'm moving with it a little bit and it takes the sting off. It's like catching a baseball. If I catch it full on, it's going to hurt my hand. But if I catch it like this a little bit, it takes enough of the sting off that's fine. And same thing, like you watch those power slap videos, the guys will like subtly move with it just a little. they'll time it so it's like so it doesn't look like they're like dodging it, but they're just kind of moving with it as it's landing, and it takes enough of the impact off. If they just stand there and eat it, that's different. And if they stand there not braced, if they just are relaxed like this, like, you know, it won't take much to knock you out. So again, like, what is a flush punch? You know, if we're talking about like, can Francis Ngannou like hit fill in the blank person flush, and can that person survive it? What is flush? Do they get to move with it at all? How much do they get to brace? How well do they get to see it coming? How perfect does it get to be? Is a punch right here flush? Is a punch right here only flush? You know, like, is a punch here flush? You know, like what, like how precise are we getting with the targeting? So, you know, broadly speaking, no. like, you know, broadly speaking, even the most durable flyweight, you know, I don't care who it is. It can be, Henry Cejudo was a durable flyweight. Like, Henry Cejudo with his big fucking head. Like, you can, broadly speaking, take that guy and Francis can hit him with anything that's even nominally a power shot, and Henry's not going to eat it, even once. You know, it is just going to floor him. But, you know, again, like, the wig, and, you know, and that's not an indictment on Henry, because, again, most heavyweights can't either, but to the degree they can, it often is going to introduce the question of, well, what is flush? How flush was it? You know, because if you were to make it optimized for Francis, if you were to say, like, well, you have to stand there relaxed, like not braced, with your eyes closed so you can't see it coming, and Francis gets to hit you with whatever, like, no one is taking that. No one on earth is taking that. I don't care how, like, much of a Andre the Giant freak you can find, how big they are, how big their fucking bones are, how tough they are, how hard their chin is, whatever, like, how dense their bones are. I don't care what freak you can find that can just take a great shot. If they are just sitting there relaxed, eyes closed, and Francis gets to hit them with anything he wants once, that's a punch. I'm not convinced a single person in history could take that and not get slept. Like, I'm really not. So, again, it's a fuzzy question, you know? But in summary, in a very sort of tangential in the weeds video that went all over the place, in summary, I don't think chins like get worse with size, because, again, like, you'd see some tipping point where like a lighter weight would just suddenly have this huge advantage, which they don't. I think it's more just that because of the power scaling higher than the chins do, and the fact that like all these other factors with the limited skills, which have their own physical explanations, and the fact that certain defenses like don't work at heavyweight, and the fact that they're like just naturally, like, with the size and power means a trade-off of speed and things like that, so it's just harder to get away. It's harder to avoid getting hit at heavyweight. Like, all that stuff combines to be like the reason they get knocked out more than the flyweights do. And as far as any flyweight surviving a flush shot from Francis, I would say, you know, probably fucking not. And also, most heavyweights aren't. And if they are, it's getting into the area of what is flush. Because, again, if it's the truest of flush, where you're not braced, you don't see it coming, you can't roll with it, I don't think anyone's surviving. So that's that. Upcoming, again, will be the video on whether or not Rusty and Chael are correct that the smaller guy, or at least like the one weight class smaller guy, actually has the advantage. If the size advantage is inversed, actually, and it's a smaller guy who's favored. I'm going to do a whole video on that next, so tune in.